This conference is about the Internet of Things and about standards. This is a very important topic because the Internet of Things bears many possibilities for society, for industrial production, we speak about the Industry 4.0, for autonomous driving, for smart homes. So there are many possibilities there. And in that, technical standards play a central role. And with standards, usually, in most cases, come patents. So patent licensing is important. But patent licensing is quite challenging in that context, even more so than in other standards that, like LTE, are mostly, or let's say 3G, mostly applied to pure communication devices. First of all, there is typically the French requirement. So standard essential patents should be licensed at terms that are fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory. Even for a standard like 3G, which is then mainly for pure communication devices, it is often very difficult to actually determine what is fair and reasonable. And for Internet of Things applications, it is even more difficult because these devices in which some functionality is embedded, they can vary wildly. So that is a big challenge. In particular, when you refer to the product level, to the final device, then you often have a very expensive overall device, think of a car, to which the Internet of Things functionality adds some little extra function, maybe not little, maybe important one, but that's hard to tease out. You need to really figure out with the overall value and the many individual contributions and their interactions, what is actually the value contribution in order to get some idea of what could be an upper limit to royalties here. Another point is that, and that relates to the first point, is the question of where actually to charge royalties. And the extreme points are the component level, meaning typically the chipset, where the functionality like LTE is implemented, versus the final device, where it finally reaches the end user. There are actually quite a few challenges, as I said before, to the device level licensing. Component level licensing has, compared to device level, a number of advantages, and one of them is transaction cost. If you consider Wi-Fi, there are about a dozen of Wi-Fi chipset makers on the planet. And compared to maybe a couple of thousand companies that make Wi-Fi devices. So if you consistently, and that should be the goal, non-discriminatory in French, if you consistently want to license Wi-Fi patents to all Wi-Fi device makers, each licensor, and there are many of them, has to contract with a couple of thousand or maybe 10,000 licensees, which is, in fact, impossible to do consistently. In contrast, licensing with a dozen of Wi-Fi chipset makers, that is possible. Another point is that if you license on the device level, it's not quite clear what were the other actors on the value chain before that. So what about the component maker and the companies that put that component into a larger device before it becomes part of the final product? Do they get a license? They need one because they need legal certainty, but you don't want to have extra contracts even if they are for free with them because, again, that would create huge transaction cost. And then licensing on the component level actually ensures some relation of the licensing to the quality of the standard implementation. So what do I mean? Chipsets for Wi-Fi or for LTE, for example, they vary a lot in their quality. So the highest level A13 Bionic Apple chip and the Apple flagship smartphone is much more expensive and much more performing than a low-level chip. And so tying royalties to that component then makes them linked to the quality of the implementation of that standard. Another point is, and that relates to any level of licensing, what actually does the French requirement mean for price discrimination? So in general, we are used to the fact that you pay for the same set of standard essential patents, different royalties, if they are part of an expensive smartphone, typically with more expensive components, or a cheap one. But to what extent can that be applied to IoT? And I see a limit set by the requirement that fair and reasonable in the definition of Article 101 refers to an ex-ante competition. And for price discrimination, you need monopoly power. You need some pricing power. Otherwise, you can't enforce price discrimination. So I see a limit set to price discrimination between devices and between components of varying levels imposed by that requirement of Article 101. A final point is what actually this question of component versus device level licensing means for innovation in small firms. Especially for small firms, it is often a real challenge to, if they want to build a new device incorporating LTE or Wi-Fi, they need to be aware that maybe a new licensor comes every month and asks for royalties. It is very hard to say how many there are, to know them ex ante, to know their stipulations of royalties ex ante. So for innovators and especially small firms, that creates a huge uncertainty. So I've recently heard an entrepreneur say, I'm more than happy to pay royalties for some IoT standard, but I need to know them ex ante. I need to factor them into the cost of my product, then I can build it. This is not given. Today, this is highly intransparent. Many licensors come after the fact, so they create some sort of hold-up. It is not known how many there are. The large number of individual licensors also pushes up royalties due to the well-known pricing externality between complementers, as Kono already described that. So, and finally, especially for small firms, they usually lack the technical competence, the legal competence, and also the time to deal with royalty requests for SEPs. That is different on the component level because component makers are larger firms that typically have all that, of course, the technical expertise by definition and the legal expertise and dedicated personnel and thus time by their size. So overall, I see room for policy intervention that favors, on the one hand, the component level licensing and then patent pools, so we avoid this fragmentation that increases transaction costs and pushes up royalties. And third, also an early announcement and public announcement of royalty demands to make sure that innovators know what they're getting into when they're adopting a standard. In that case, society could obtain the full benefits of IoT. Thank you.